A Prisoner in the Caucasus by Leo Tolstoy. Part 4. Zilin lived in this way for a month. During the day he sauntered about the aeole or busied himself with some handicraft, but at night, when all was silent in the aeole, he dug at the floor of the barn. It was no easy task digging, because of the stones, but he worked away at them with his file, and at last had made a hole under the wall large enough to get through. If only I could get to know the lay of the land, thought he, and which way to go, but none of the Tartars will tell me. So he chose a day when the master was away from home, and set off after dinner to climb the hill beyond the village, and to look around. But before leaving home, the master always gave orders to his son to watch Zilin, and not to lose sight of him. So the lad ran after Zilin, shouting, "Don't go! Father does not allow it. I'll call the neighbors if you won't come back." Zilin tried to persuade him, and said, "I'm not going far. I only want to climb that hill. I want to find a herb to cure sick people with. You come with me if you like. How could I run away with these shackles on? Tomorrow I'll make a bow and arrows for you." So he persuaded the lad, and they went. To look at the hill, it did not seem far to the top, but it was hard walking with the shackles on his leg. Zilin went on and on, but it was all he could do to reach the top. There he sat down and noted how the land lay. To the south, beyond the barn, was a valley in which a herd of horses was pasturing, and at the bottom of the valley one could see another aeole. Beyond that was a still steeper hill, and another hill beyond that. Between the hills, in the blue distance, were forests, and still further off were mountains, rising higher and higher. The highest of them were covered with snow, white as sugar, and one snowy peak towered above all the rest. To the east and to the west were other such hills, and here and there smoke rose from the aeoles and the ravines. "Ah," thought he, "all that is Tartar country." And he turned towards the Russian side. At his feet he saw a river, and the aeole he lived in, surrounded by little gardens. He could see women, like tiny dolls, sitting by the river, rinsing clothes. Beyond the aeole was a hill, lower than the one to the south, and beyond it 2 other hills, well wooded, and between these a smooth, bluish plain. And far, far across the plain, something that looked like a cloud of smoke. Zilin tried to remember where the sun used to rise and set when he was living in the fort, and he saw that there was no mistake. The Russian fort must be in that plain. Between those 2 hills, he would have to make his way when he escaped. The sun was beginning to set. The white, snowy mountains turned red, and the dark hills turned darker. Mists rose from the ravine, and the valley, where he supposed the Russian fort to be, seemed on fire with the sunset glow. Zilin looked carefully. Something seemed to be quivering in the valley like smoke from a chimney, and he felt sure the Russian fortress was there. It had grown late. The mullah's cry was heard. The herds were being driven home, the cows were lowing, and the lad kept saying, "Come home!" But Zilin did not feel inclined to go away. At last, however, they went back. "Well," thought Zilin, "now that I know the way, it is time to escape." He thought of running away that night. The nights were dark, the moon had waned, but as ill luck would have it, the Tartars returned home that evening. They generally came back driving cattle before them and in good spirits, but this time they had no cattle. All they brought home was the dead body of a Tartar, the Red One's brother, who had been killed. They came back looking sullen, and they all gathered together for the burial. Zilin also came out to see it. They wrapped the body in a piece of linen, without any coffin, and carried it out of the village, and laid it on the grass under some plane trees. The mullah and the old men came. They wound clothes around their caps, took off their shoes, and squatted on their heels, side by side, near the corpse. The mullah was in front. Behind him, in a row, were 3 old men in turbans, and behind them again the other Tartars. All cast down their eyes and sat in silence. This continued a long time, until the mullah raised his head and said, Allah, which means God. He said that one word, and they all cast down their eyes again, and were again silent for a long time. They sat quite still, not moving or making any sound. Again the mullah lifted his head and said, Allah! And they all repeated, Allah, Allah! And were again silent. The dead body lay immovable on the grass, and they sat as still as if they too were dead. Not one of them moved. There was no sound but that of the leaves on the plane trees stirring in the breeze. Then the mullah repeated the prayer, and they all rose. They lifted the body and carried it in their arms to a hole in the ground. It was not an ordinary hole, but was hollowed out under the ground like a vault. They took the body under the arms and by the legs, bent it, and let it gently down, pushing it under the earth in a sitting posture, with the hands folded in front. The Nogay brought some green rushes, which they stuffed into the hole, and quickly covering it with earth, they smoothed the ground, and set an upright stone at the head of the grave. Then they trod the earth down, and again sat in a row before the grave, keeping silence for a long time. At last they rose, said, Allah, 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 and sighed. The red-bearded Tartar gave money to the old man. Then he too rose, took a whip, struck himself with it 3 times on the forehead, and went home. The next morning Zilin saw the red Tartar, followed by 3 others, leading a mare out of the village. When they were beyond the village, the red-bearded Tartar took off his tunic and turned up his sleeves, showing his stout arms. Then he drew a dagger and sharpened it on a whetstone. The other Tartars raised the mare's head, and he cut her throat, threw her down, and began skinning her, loosening the hide with his big hands. Women and girls came and began to wash the entrails and the inwards. The mare was cut up, the pieces taken into the hut, and the whole village collected at the red Tartar's hut for a funeral feast. For 3 days they went on eating the flesh of the mare, drinking booza, and praying for the dead man. All the Tartars were at home. On the 4th day, at dinner time, Zilin saw them preparing to go away. Horses were brought out. They got ready, and some 10 of them, the red one among them, rode away. But Abdul stayed at home. It was new moon, and the nights were still dark. Ah, thought Zilin, tonight is the time to escape. And he told Koselin, but Koselin's heart failed him. How can we escape, he said. We don't even know the way. I know the way, said Zilin. Even if you do, said Koselin, we can't reach the fort in one night. If we can't, said Zilin, we'll sleep in the forest. See here, I have saved some cheeses. What's the good of sitting and moping here? If they send your ransom, well and good, but suppose they don't manage to collect it. The Tartars are angry now, because the Russians have killed one of their men. They are talking of killing us. Koselin thought it over. Well, let's go, said he. That's the end of part 4. Good night, everybody.